Good afternoon, everybody, or a very early good morning in some parts of the world, or late afternoon, and welcome to yet another Lunch and Learn from Aaszu. And I am together with Andrew as a party today. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, how are you, Arno?
I'm really good, thank you. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in Malta at the moment. Sun's still shining somewhat.
Yeah, I'm looking outside in Mallorca, beautiful day. And guys, feel free to share your location in the chat. We really want to know where you guys are, but we really appreciate you taking the time to be here. I know more people wanted to come, but obviously we're all busy and working. So we're recording this webinar and we'll transmit it later. And Andrew, before we start, I'll show the guys, I'm ready. I am ready to go. So it's going to be an interesting one. But before we do, you're ready to go. Well, so let's first start with what are we doing today? And so we're basically doing together with No.12. How long have we been working together, Andrew? For 5 years already, 6 years, for a long time.
Right, around 5 years, I think.
Yeah, and they've done some amazing workshops in our events, and this is their second webinar with us. We're really excited. And today we're doing an introduction to sweet wines. And we're talking about techniques and producing, what foods you compare with it, and can I tell how sweet a wine is? Well, I think Andrew's going to ask me that, so I'm going to be prepared. So thank you so much for bringing me the wines so that I could actually participate in this. It's pretty cool. Andrew is the general manager of No.12. Andrew, you want to say something more about where it came from, why you founded No.12?
Well, actually, so No.12, one of the shareholders is a ship supply company. It's one of the main shareholders, a ship supply company. So this shareholder and part of the company that I form part of has been around since the 1860s, supplying ships. We're speaking warships, tankers, cruise liners, which huge volumes. And then around 2012, 2013, we formed No.12 Fine Wines and Provisions to be very, very specific and very specialist on wine, food, and spirits to the super yacht industry. So that's how it actually started. Just if I could say, the name No.12, because I always get this question, actually started because the shareholder's first warehouse was the 12th warehouse in Malta, where they used to store all the stuff to deliver to the ships. And when we were thinking of the name, we always kept referring to the warehouse where we keep all our good wines as No.12. So it was pretty much a no-brainer for what company name to choose.
It's a nice name. I mean, it's nice to tell the story behind the name. That's always it puts an extra layer to it.
And there are 12 bottles in a case of wine, so it works.
It works very well. Okay, so we're talking about wines, and so hopefully some of you have got your half a bottle of Sauternes. I do. And you half a bottle of Tokaji. I don't, right?
Tokaji.
Yeah, Tokaji.
Wines, you pronounce it Tokaji.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll forgive you on this one.
I'm ignorant on these kind of things. So we're going to taste wines. I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. And Andrew, you want me to start your presentation?
You may.
Perfect. Have fun, guys. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we're here to help you. The whole purpose of this is to get more understanding of sweet wines, for you to use that knowledge on your vessel. Here we go, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build on that, so no, if there are questions, please do ask these questions. Conducting a webinar is somewhat maybe more difficult than actually giving a class where I can see you guys, drinking and interacting. So sometimes if I go too fast or too slow or I'm not clear on something, please do ask a question, and I'd love to answer you. So as Arno said, my name is Andrew. I'm the general manager of No.12 Fine Wines Provisions. And what we do is we supply super yachts in Mallorca, Malta, and Barcelona with wine, spirits, and food provisions. So I can go to the next slide or no? I don't know if I should do it or you do. You do. So as an introduction to sweet wines, first of all, sweet wines are fun. It's a wine that is extremely underrated. Many a time they can also be extremely expensive wines, especially the very rich sweet wines. But these sweet wines are meant to be drunk with food, and I think this is one of the reasons why in the introduction I wrote wine pairing, because too often we end up drinking sweet wines either on their own at a party or with desserts that are probably too sweet for the wine and actually render the wine annoyingly bland. So just as an introduction, there are 5 types of sweet wine. There's the sparkling dessert wine, which many of you know, kind of like a Moscato d'Asti. Then there are lightly sweet dessert wines / lightly sweet wines, and I will explain why I'm saying that in one of the next slides. Then there's the richly sweet dessert wines, such as the Tokaji or the Sauternes that Anna was speaking about before. Then there are sweet red wines, like Recioto di Valpolicella. Basically, sweet red wines are made with red grapes. And then there's fortified wine, such as port and sherry. Now, because of time constraints, I'm not going to talk much about fortified wines. To be honest, as much as I love fortified wines, I think they probably need a class on their own. There's so much to talk about them. It would be a little bit sad for fortified wines for me to just mention it at the end. So I'll just give a quick brief on fortified wines. To make fortified wines such as sherry and such as port, the only way you can make them is by adding a distilled alcohol to wine. So you have a dry wine, any wine, and all you do is you add brandy or a distilled spirit, and then you age it in barrels or however you want to age it to make a port or a sherry. That is an extremely basic definition of fortified wines. So, sparkling dessert wines. If I may go to the next slide. Thank you. Before we actually go to sparkling wines, I want people to understand how we make sweet wine. I think probably till before I actually started studying wines, my perception on sweet wine was, besides a wine that's supposed to be bad in quality, which it actually isn't, I always thought to make sweet wines you add sugar. It is actually illegal anywhere in the world to add sugar, proper sugar granules to wine to make it sweet. There are other methods that we have to use, or winemakers use, to actually make sweet wine. This is the techie part. We only have one slide on techie parts. So let's just get this bit a little bit out of the way. So what they do is, when you actually ferment the wine, the grape juice is the sugar. That's extremely sweet, and that's why it is so important that in the vineyards you get the sweetest and best berries possible. Then you add the yeast to the grape juice, and that ferments to make alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, if you leave the sugar or the wine, the grape juice, and the yeast in contact till the yeast eats up all the sugar, you end up with a dry wine, because it's removed and eaten all the sugar, which has turned into alcohol and carbon dioxide. But if we stop the fermentation at a certain period, at a certain time, then there will be sugar left in the wine from the grape juice, and that will render the wine sweet. So that is one of the most common methods of making sweet wine, especially the sparkling sweet wines, for example. And then there is another method which we'll come to with the richly sweet wines, and that becomes and then when it gets really, really interesting. But again, so the method is the grape juice, you add the yeast for fermentation. If the yeast eats all the grape juice during fermentation, you end up with a dry wine. If you stop the fermentation halfway through and the yeast would have not eaten all the sugars, then you end up with a sweet wine. So it also depends on when you stop the fermentation. Now, how do you stop fermentation? Fermentation needs a certain heat bracket. If you cool the wine during fermentation to a degree lower than needed for fermentation, you're going to stop the fermentation. So there are two ways of stopping fermentation, either adding brandy or cooling the fermentation tank, and that will stop the fermentation and you get a sweet wine. So I'll go to the next slide, or no, please? There we go. So sparkling sweet wines. This is probably one of the most common, for example, Moscato d'Asti, and that's exactly how they make a Moscato d'Asti. I wanted to mention over here, as you can see on the slides, there's different wording on the bottles, and that is what will tell the consumer whether the wine is sweet or not. And I just wanted to touch on these because I often get questions. Listen, I found a champagne or a sparkling wine. It's this semi-secco. Is it supposed to be dry or sweet? And the terminology is just written over here in the small presentation. So demi-sec, which means half dry, means basically off dry or slightly sweet. Amabile, which is an Italian word for slightly sweet as well. Semi-secco is exactly like demi-sec, so half dry or off dry. Doux, and that is sweet, and that is really sweet. So when you see a sparkling wine with doux written on the bottle, you know that it's a pretty sweet sparkling wine. Same in Italian, which is dolce, and dulce in Spanish, and molle, which is sweet, and that you find it in some different regions in France. What's interesting about these sparkling wines, such as Moscato d'Asti, is that they have an extremely high acidity. And if there is one thing that I think you should take back from this little webinar that we're having, is that in order for sweet wine to be enjoyable, it needs a very high acidic / mineral content. So the acidity is extremely important. And the reason behind that is that the acidity makes the wine fresh. It can be sweet, but it can be fresh. If it doesn't have the acidity and minerality in the wine, then it would be like drinking Ribena, basically, because Ribena doesn't have the acidity, so it's just richly sweet in your mouth. And that's what's so beautiful about sweet wines. And all the sweet wines, including the rich wines, have an extremely high acidic and mineral content. Also, what makes sparkling wine so enjoyably sweet? The carbon dioxide itself, the CO2, actually reduces or lessens the perception of sweetness when you're drinking it. So actually the amount of residual sugar in a Moscato d'Asti is quite high, but you don't taste it so sweet, and you can actually have it with for example, a starter or hors d'oeuvres, is because of the CO2. The sparkle in it gives it a bit of a freshness to the wine. Just one other thing, in champagne, so champagne is made in a slightly different method. So champagne is made in the traditional method. I'm not going to go into the detail of how champagne is made, but champagne, you can buy sweet champagne. Now, to buy sweet champagne or sweet traditional sparkling wines, what you need to do is you add a liqueur d'expédition, they call it. So once the champagne is made, they add the grape juice, and that is the sugar. So you cannot actually add sugar, but you can add grape juice at the end and close the champagne. So that is how they actually make the sweetness of champagne. And the amount of grape juice, which is sweetener, they add to the champagne, basically decides on how sweet the champagne or traditional method sparkling wine will end up. Should we go to the next slide or no? Are there any questions or no? Have you received anything yet?
No questions yet, which means that you're absolutely clear, I think. I think people will start asking questions as soon as like we go to the tasting part, right?
Yeah, probably.
I also believe like this is one of those topics where like sweet wines are, what you said, a bit underrated, right? Like in the old days, you would like youngsters when we were young, you started drinking sweet wine and then very quickly realized that that was not done. Right?
Yeah, I think the biggest problem with sweet wines is, if I can answer your question a little bit, I know is unfortunately they can be quite expensive. So okay, a Moscato d'Asti itself is not expensive, but it's very lightly sweet. So what happens is when we end up drinking sweet wines, especially when we're young, we drink the cheaper sweet wines, and that the issue with those wines is actually the acidity and the minerality that I was speaking about before. So those wines that cannot command such high prices usually don't have such a searing acidity, such a high refreshing acidic and mineral content, that the wines end up a little bit, we call it cloying in the mouth, a little bit sickly in the mouth. And that unfortunately puts most people off sweet wines, never to realize that there's a whole array of beautiful sweet wines that we just don't taste, mainly because of price and because of our wrong perception when we're young. Before we get into the richly sweet wines, there's the lightly sweet wines. Now, okay, maybe I'm speaking lightly and richly, maybe a bit complicated, and this is why I want to say fruity, because there is a huge misunderstanding on certain wines such as Rieslings, Gewürztraminer. These wines are perceived to be very sweet, and they can be sweet, but not always sweet. They are usually extremely fruity and aromatic wines. So Rieslings and Gewürztraminer are predominantly German or French grown, and on the bottle, especially if it's a German bottle, they would write how sweet the wine is on the bottle. And there are 5 types. There's Cabinet, which means that it's absolutely dry. The wine will still be fruity and aromatic, so you still get nice, refreshing fruit flavors, but the residual sugar is actually only 1 or 2 grams of sweetness. And that is actually pretty dry. When we go into the really rich sweet stuff, you realize that, for example, a Tokaji goes up to around 400 grams per liter of residual sugar. So the difference is huge. They're not actually very sweet. And then after Cabinet, there's Spätlese and Auslese, very complicated German words, I know. And those are late harvest, and we're going to get to that in a short while. And then there's Birnauslese, Trockenbeerenauslese, which we'll explain later, and those are really richly sweet. So if you want a very light, fruity, sweet wine, then you go for the Cabinet or Spätlese wine. If you see Cabinet or Spätlese, it is just slightly sweet, not too sweet, more on the fruity, okay? We like to pair these wines. I think it's really important that these wines are paired with the right food. If you end up pairing, for example, a Gewürztraminer with a very, very delicate fish, it's probably going to overpower the fish. It's going to be too aromatic. If it's going to be with a cream sauce, it might jar with the creaminess of the sauce. So the best would be with, for example, spicy dishes, fruit-based dishes with, for example, peach inside, or pineapple, ginger. These are flavors that you often find in these type of wines, such as Gewürztraminer and Riesling. I also think most cheeses, such as the Parmigiano Reggiano, are perfect pairings to these fresh, fruity wines. So we go to the really sweet stuff now, or the good stuff. Maybe we can also start tasting some wines. So this is, now we're getting into the proper rich golden stuff. Now, what is it that makes the really dark dessert wines so expensive? And I think the most important thing is they are made with the best and top or highest quality grapes. To make a good sweet wine, you need the best possible grapes. These wines usually, because of the residual sugar and the amount of sugar they have, and the very high acidity, they can age. These wines can age even up to 50 years, 60 years or more, and they will remain fantastic, if not get better. In my opinion, the older these wines are, the better they become, the more complex they become. The different flavors that are coming out. These wines are also hugely important in history. So back, for example, if we go back to Champagne back in the 1800s, Champagne was not the Champagne we know now. Champagne was extremely sweet. All Champagne was extremely sweet because our ancestors preferred sweeter wines. Tokaji, which is a Hungarian sweet wine, was actually loved by the Russian Tsars. Sauternes is loved by the world over and idolized, I think, by the Americans especially. And there's also the South African Constantia, cloying Constantia, for example, which is enjoyed by the English and the Dutch. And that is actually a fantastic sweet wine, which you can usually get at a pretty decent price. So the price-quality ratio is incredibly good.
That's probably why the Dutch like it, right?
Probably. There's good value over there, isn't there? So there are 4 ways to make this amazing stuff. And I think I want to explain a little bit on how these 4 styles of making this really rich golden, liquid gold in a bottle. Shall we go to the next slide or no? Please. So before I mentioned the 5 names, the 5 German names, which was Kabinett, and then Spätlese, Auslese, Birnauslese, Trockenbirnauslese. And Kabinett is dry, whereas, so Kabinett is dry, whereas Spätlese is actually late harvest. So what happens is we leave the grapes in the vineyard, hanging on the vine a little bit longer than usual. And what happens is the grape starts to raisin. So a Spätlese would be a slightly raisined grape. An Auslese, so for example, if you pick after 7 months, it would be a Spätlese. If you pick after 10 months, then it would be an Auslese, because the raisin grapes would be much smaller and even more raisined out. We would leave them on the vine much longer. So there is even in late harvest, you can determine how sweet you want the wine. And for late harvest, we can use both red grapes and white grapes. However, the most commonly used grapes are Chenin Blanc, Semillon, Gewürztraminer, and Riesling. On the red grapes, there are quite a few red grapes such as Syrah and Zinfandel, late harvest Zinfandel, which is absolutely fantastic because those type of grapes can also keep the acidity, and that's exactly what's important. On late harvest, a little bit like the light sweet wines, hot and spicy food is also fantastic because it can soften the spices, so the sweetness will actually soften the spice, especially as well with very light sweet desserts, such as, for example, a vanilla ice cream. So that would be the perfect pairing with a late harvest, as well as cheeses. Also, let's make sure that we serve them very cold. Once we serve these late harvest wines too warm, then it's going to be just too much in the mouth. Oh no, if I'm not mistaken, one of your wines that you have open is a late harvest, correct?
I believe so. Am I correct to assume that this is this one?
That is exactly the late harvest. I don't have a late harvest yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see what Ono thinks of a late harvest wine. Is that fine? Ono, if I use you as my guinea pig?
I'll be delighted.
So if we just see the color, which I can see from the screen, it's not too dark. So I'm going to show you something that's not late harvest. This is even more. So this is even richer, and you can see it's very, very dark. Whereas Ono's is a little bit lighter. So it's I would say something like a Spätlese or maybe an Auslese. Do you want to try it or no, and tell me what you think?
Well, I already did try it, but I'll try
Sounds
it
pretty
again.
good. Sounds pretty good.
Well, it's obviously sweet.
It is obviously sweet.
But
Does it annoy you in the mouth? And this is probably the most important thing. Is it too sticky in the mouth? Is it like Ribena? Or is it still somewhat refreshing in the mouth?
No, it's somewhat refreshing in the mouth. I mean, I also tried the Sauternes, like obviously previously. I would prefer that because this one is more fruity, right?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what late harvest is. So the late harvest, you still have a big concentration on the fruit. You get a lot of pineapple, peaches, maybe a little bit of honey and ginger, but it's still a very fruity wine. So you don't get too much complexity or too much complex notes. However, late harvest wines can still age and gain complexity in the bottle. So that's exactly what a late harvest wine is. Did you enjoy it or no?
I am totally enjoying this, guys.
What's nice about the late harvest is it can actually be paired really well with slightly salty foods, just like a cheese, like a Parmigiano Reggiano, without being overpowering. So even with just, for example, salted peanuts and late harvest, fantastic. There isn't too much sweetness in it.
Oh, it's growing on me, the Muscatel. It's growing on me, to be honest. Oh, I see a question popping in. I wish we could have some wine as well. Well, we told you could have. Like, Andrew has been very kind to bring me those 2 bottles, which will be done by the end of the afternoon. And well, I think the girls are going to go and be all over it. And I had another question with someone who sent an email because they couldn't attend. Said, like, why are we not covering orange wines?
Okay, so orange wines. We could cover orange wines in another webinar. Orange wines actually is one of the latest trends. I personally think orange wines is actually a really cool upcoming trend. So I'm a big fan of orange wines. Orange wines is actually a trend now, but it's not something that has been invented now. It's been invented years ago. What orange wine is, as a very, very brief descriptor, it's not actually sweet wine. So orange wine is, so when you make, to explain orange wine, when you make red wine, you get red grapes, you squash the red grapes, and the juice comes out. If you get a red grape now and you press it, the juice is clear, it's transparent, it's not red. So to make red wine, they squash the red grapes and they leave the juice in contact with the skin. Now, when you leave it in contact with the skin, it becomes rosé and then eventually red wine. It's a bit like a tea bag. If you put a tea bag in a cup of boiling water for 3 seconds, you get a light colored.
Yeah.
If you leave it for an hour, then the water is going to be very dark. And that's how you make red wine. Now, they decided to use exactly the same concept with white grapes. And what happens is when you leave the juice with white grapes, the color actually becomes orange. So it becomes an orange wine. But that doesn't really have anything to do with the sweetness of the wine. So you can have a sweet orange wine, but as a definition, orange wine is not necessarily sweet.
Well, thank you for that information.
Even though it looks like an orange wine, I don't know if you can see my...
I'll have another sip.
Because I've got peanuts as well, or some Parmigiano.
I should have prepared better and have like a bit of Parmigiano, some salty stuff here.
This is lunchtime for us. No, so
yeah, true. Well, Natalie, if you're listening, if you got some peanuts down there, just bring them up.
So we go to the next slide.
Are we going to the next slide? Yes,
yes. So that's late harvest. Now we're going to the really good, fun stuff. The noble rot. If you can see the picture over there, it's maybe not the most beautiful picture I chose, and those aren't just raisin grapes. So far we said if we leave the grapes on the vine, hanging on the vine, they're going to raisin up. However, there are some parts of the world, such as Sauternes or Tokaji, where there is a big diurnal effect. So basically a big temperature change between the morning and the afternoons and the evenings, that there is a special mold that grows on the grape. So that's not actually a mistake in the picture. Those grapes are actually moldy. It is called a noble rot in the wine world. The technical word for that is botrytis cinerea. So botrytis refers to wines made out of this moldy grape, actually. So what does the mold do? So the grapes are already late harvest. They've been left on the vine for a while. And then the mold attacks the grape and actually eats away at the water content. So it removes even more water content from the grape and adds certain flavors to the grape juice. So it adds nuttiness and marmalade flavors to the juice, and that's why these wines end up so complex with such beautiful flavors of nuts and ginger and marmalade and honey, because of this botrytis. Sauternes, and that is one of the reasons why Sauternes is so expensive. It's because it is affected by botrytis. So Chateau d'Yquem, which sells at easily 500 euros a bottle, is considered probably the most legendary Sauternes, and that is made by botrytized grapes. So what they do is they actually specifically pick berry by berry that has been affected by botrytis. So you can imagine the yield of grape juice that they get. So from a bunch of berries, if 80% are affected by botrytis and 20 or 30% or 20% are not affected by botrytis, those 20% will be used for, say, a late harvest or a different wine, and only 80% of the bunch will be used for their Chateau d'Yquem. If it's a bad year and only 10% of the vine is affected by botrytis, then only 20% of the grapes are used for their Sauternes. So you can imagine how costly it actually is to make these wines. In a similar fashion, exactly the same way, there is Tokaji from Hungary. And what's beautiful about Tokaji is there are different levels of sweetness. So the least level of sweetness is 3 putuños, which goes up to 6 putuños. So you have 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's Aaszu Essentia, and that is the sweetest you can possibly have. Just, I think, interesting to know how the word putuños actually came about. So putuños refers to baskets, a basket of 25 kilograms. So what they do is 1 putuños has 25 kilograms of only botrytis grapes, and they add that to 136 liters of dry still wine. So it's like adding 25 kilos of sugar per 136 liters of wine. That is 1 putuños. So you can imagine what 6 putuños would be like. So when you have 3 or 4 putuños, you're actually having the same amount of kilos is to liters. So it's a 50-50 sugar is to wine. When it comes to Essentia, there is actually no dry wine involved. It is just the 25 kilos of grapes that are pressed with their own weight to get out a little bit of juice, the Essentia, the essence, to make Essentia. Obviously, you can imagine that Tokaji Essentia is extremely expensive and held in extremely high esteem, because from a bunch of grapes you get a teaspoon of wine. So you can imagine how expensive it is to make. Now that we're speaking about it, oh no, I've got a 2-minute video about Tokaji and how it's actually made in Tokaji by one of the most famous Tokaji producers.
Well, yes, that's fantastic. But like, I'll just like listen what happens to me. I'm getting some gorgonzola.
Oh,
Is that with the wine I just had, the Muscatel?
Exactly.
Well, let me try that first then.
Okay.
Basically, I'm gonna have a little bite. Great gorgonzola. That's really nice together.
That's nice.
That's really nice. That's beyond
It makes
nice.
a difference, doesn't it? The
It
sweet
does.
quality brings out of the beauty in the wine.
Yeah, but like it wasn't that sticky in my mouth, but like now with the gorgonzola combined, it vaporizes. It's like it blends. It's amazing. Cool. Enough.
Also, what happens is, oh no, it's what's really interesting is gorgonzola is very fatty.
Yeah.
Very high fat content. The high acidity in the wine cuts to the fattiness. So then the pairing is just wonderful. So shall we play the video, or shall we actually taste the Sauternes before we play the video?
Whatever you decide, it's your webinar.
So, as we said, Tokaji and Sauternes are made in exactly the same way, and that is with these boat writers grapes, or the noble rot. I think you also have a Sauternes, or no?
I do.
There we go. And I have a Sauternes here as well. Now,
so I realized that so this is an expensive wine, you're saying, right? In general.
It is a relatively expensive wine, yes. Because
that's why I got a small bottle.
Most people drink half bottles of sweet wine for the simple reason that they are very expensive, one. Yeah. And secondly, there's only so much you can drink of it because it is very sweet.
Okay.
Now, I think what's interesting, just from showing the glass, oh no, your glass and my glass, they're both Sauternes.
Yeah.
So they're exactly the same place, but they're different colors.
Yes.
The reason that mine is so much darker is that mine is actually a 2007 Sauternes, and I think yours is a 2015.
Yes, 2015, indeed.
Okay. So the difference in flavor, unfortunately, we cannot taste each other's wine. Besides COVID, we're far away. But the reason behind this is, first of all, with age, the color of any white wine, not just Sauternes, any white wine gets darker with age. So even if it's a normal Sauvignon Blanc, if you leave it age, it gets dark. Same with a Sauternes, it gets dark. But the difference is a Sauternes can age 50, 60 years. So for a 2007, this one, it's actually pretty young. So I'm drinking a pretty young Sauternes, and you're drinking a very young Sauternes. But both are made with the noble rot. Shall we try this one or no before we go to the video?
Yep, I'm on it.
Now there is a very, even just from the nose, there's a very specific flavor or smell.
Absolutely, it's way less fruity. You mentioned the word marmalade earlier. I would add a bit of oaky to it, right?
It is perfect marmalade. You get that.
Yeah. Do I do that with gorgonzola as well?
I think it would be fantastic with gorgonzola. And the acidity is still very high. It's very mineral in the mouth.
Yeah, it is.
Very complex. So you get nutty notes as well.
Yeah, it's much more complex than the Muscatel. Much more complex.
Yes.
I must say, I preferred the Sauternes from the start, but the Muscatel is growing on me.
Yeah. What happens is the Sauternes is a bit more complex. So I would say maybe it's a bit more of a grown-up wine because the noble rot actually adds a lot of nuttiness to the wine, a lot of this nutty honey beeswax type of flavors to it, and then they aged in oak to give it a bit more of a vanilla flavor to it as well.
Yeah,
I think
it's amazing. It's very nice.
Well. Now, how can you tell when, especially a wine like this, is of really good quality? And that is the length in the mouth. How long you keep tasting the wine till the taste stops. How long? What is the time that you keep tasting the wine? So
after swallowing it,
the wine in my mouth, it just keeps lingering on. The flavors keep lingering on. Now, the more the flavors linger on, the higher the quality of the wine. So, for example, I'm a big fan of Sauternes. So this is a Chateau d'Arche,
Yeah.
which is a Grand Cru Classé. It's a very good Sauternes, but it's not a Chateau d'Yquem. So the price for this would be around 50, 60 euros for a bottle.
Wow.
But then a Chateau d'Yquem costs around 200 euros a bottle. Especially of this vintage, would go up to 300-400 euros a bottle. And what makes such a price difference between a Chateau d'Yquem and a Chateau d'Arche? As much as I am a fan of this Chateau d'Arche, the length of Chateau d'Yquem is stratospheric. I tasted, I was lucky enough to taste the Chateau d'Yquem just not long ago. I think it was last February. And I kid you not, Ono, I had a Chateau d'Yquem at a restaurant, and I had it with dessert and cheeses.
Yeah.
Walked home to the apartment, which took me a good 25 minutes, half an hour, and I was still tasting the wine. And that for me, it's mind-blowing.
Right? Mind-blowing.
It is. And it's out of this world. So I'm a huge fan of these super sweet wines. So shall we go to the video? Or shall we go to the next one? Next slide. It's up to you, actually.
No, whatever you decide, it's your one. Do you need a break for a video?
My concern is the time, actually. Seeing it's 1:15. Do I have another 7 minutes, 8 minutes?
Yeah, you do. Want to do a video?
So again, the video, it's 2 minutes.
2 minutes of video, guys. We'll mute ourselves. Enjoy. That's an interesting video. You have to unmute yourself again, Andrew, please. Can you unmute yourself? No, you're still muted. Yeah, here we go.
Sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. I'm lucky I chose half a bottle. If it were a full bottle, I would have remained on mute.
Can you show your bottle, please? Show your bottle.
I will do.
So yours, you drank way more than I did.
I had time to prepare for the presentation.
Oh, that's it. Wow. Cheers.
Cheers to that. I think we can go to the next slide, or no?
Yeah.
So the next slide is actually about ice wine. So far we've determined that you can make sweet wine from no rot or from leaving the grapes on the vine for a longer time, or actually freezing the grapes, literally freezing the grapes. And that's why ice wine is most common in places like Canada. They usually use Riesling or Vidal grapes. And what they do is, it's actually very difficult to make ice wine, and so costly, because you need to pick the grape when it is frozen. So first of all, it's weather dependent. And if you don't have cold enough weather to make ice wine, it's impossible to make it. And secondly, you actually need to go out and pick the grape berry by berry when it's frozen and crush it when it's frozen. So what happens is, because of the ice, it reduces the liquid and increases the sweetness of the wine. Incredibly expensive and beautiful wines as well. Unfortunately, and I think I have to say this, unfortunately, due to global warming, obviously, as you can imagine, ice wine is becoming even harder to make in certain areas. So next slide, please, Ono. I think we're going to pretty much the last style, or the last method of making sweet wine, and that is using straw mats, or as in this case, they've used straw trays, and this is also known as passito in Italy. So what they do is they actually pick the grapes and then they leave them to dry out in the sun. And that's why they put them on mats. And then once they raisin out and dry out in the sun, obviously the alcohol increases, the sugar content increases, and they can make sweet wine. So for example, Vinsanto and also Passito are both made in this way. The difference is that Vinsanto is usually aged in oak barrels, whereas Passito not so much. And Passito, they use Muscat. So the same grape that you are drinking, Ono. So Passito is actually made with exactly the same grape of the late harvest wine that Ono is drinking.
Which were the first or the second one of
The
mine?
first one. The first one.
Oh, the one that's empty. I'll have to refill.
And I have a passito over here, and this is Passito di Pantelleria. So it's from Pantelleria, an island of Italy and Malta, actually. So it's actually just south of Malta. And this is made by actually drying the grapes on these straw mats. So different to Ono's. So Ono's wine and my wine is the same grape, but two different methods. Ono's method of the wine he's drinking is they left the grapes hanging for longer, whereas in my wine, they actually picked the grape and left them to dry on mats. And this gives it, this adds more nuttiness than a wine like the late harvest that Ono has. So if we had to taste Ono's and mine next to each other, Ono's, as he said rightly so before, will be fruity, and this one over here is much nuttier. So again, it's got more of a nuttiness to it. It also has much more oak to it, much more wood to it. Also, mine is a much older vintage, so mine is a 2002 vintage. So it's 18 years old. Extremely dark and very, very sweet. But the acidity and the minerality is still high. It's still easy in the mouth. It's still lovely in the mouth. They're also the same is also done in Greece. They use straw wines, very similar to Vinsanto. In Germany, they call it straw wine. And then there's also in Austria, Schildwein, and also in France, where they use the vin de paille. So these are all the same method, basically, of making sweet wines in different countries. And so now I think, or at least I hope that you've understood that there are different styles to making sweet wines. And if I can just go through the styles one more time, there is the late harvest. So you leave the grapes hanging. Then there is the noble rot. There is the reducing the fermentation or stopping the fermentation. And then there's the straw mat. And those are the four different ways of making sweet wine. So, I don't know.
That was an amazing lecture. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Sorry, I set my time by 6 minutes.
Yeah, but you did it well. So I say cheers with the Muscatel.
Cheers to you too. I hope you enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed this. Guys, we're almost at the end of it. So Andrew is always available. If you got any questions about wine, just pop him an email. And he will. He's very responsive in general. That's what I know. So anything you want to. I think this was a topic that I look very much forward to because it's as I said, I think sweet wines are underrated, and if they're already seen, they're most seen as dessert wines. I think we've proven today that they're way more than that. They're way more classier than a lot of people expect. So it's something that you could definitely. It's good to have a bit of knowledge about it to present to the guests or the owner. So I think everybody can benefit from this. So, Andrew, thank you so much for today.
My pleasure. I got to open some extremely nice sweet wines here, so the pleasure was all mine.
Perfect. So again, everybody, if you don't worry, you can look this back. We'll record it, share it where you want to share it, like it where you want to like it. And Andrew, I hope very soon we'll be back to normal and we'll be doing workshops where we can engage with people, taste together, and have a great time.
Absolutely. If I just may add one last thing, on the food and wine pairing, which you rightly mentioned now, especially these sweet wines, I think they need their opportunity to shine. So when we do pair them with desserts, I usually prefer to pair them with desserts that are either fruity or not too sweet. So for example, chocolate-based desserts are usually way too sweet for these type of wines. These type of wines would be fantastic with lemon cheesecakes, fruit flans, fruit salads, panna cotta, these type of desserts, even just a plain vanilla ice cream is good enough with these desserts, with these sweet wines. Or you can go down the savory route, which sometimes I prefer, and you can go down the savory route of Stilton cheese or Parmigiano Reggiano, so the cheeses route, something very salty like foie gras.
Yeah.
Or if you really, really want to, try something extremely daring, you can maybe try Sauternes and oysters. And believe me, it really works. The saltiness of the oysters and the sweetness of the Sauternes is actually a beautiful experience. So I'll leave it at that.
That sounds amazing, and I think I and all the people watching will keep that in mind. Thank you again, Andrew. Have a wonderful day in Malta. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in today, and hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye to everybody. We're out here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Santé.